And we are back for another episode of the Managing with Mind and Heart podcast. Thanks for joining us again, dear listeners. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Good. Ethan, how are you doing today?
I am, you know what? I'm just doing well. And I'm not going to elaborate on that, but it's a good day. Life is good.
Well, hey, I am going to elaborate on that.
Okay.
You and I and our partners in life, we're going to go camping this weekend together, and we're going to go to a concert, and we're going to have a lot of fun, and I am just really excited about that.
I am too. That's going to be a blast. In fact, we should just talk about our fun events and times for this whole episode. Sure
one of these days, we should just sit and talk about, all this cool stuff we love doing on our own and together. And so we're going to go see Hosey, and we're going to camp at the Gorge in Washington State and just we're going to have a blast.
Awesome. Yes, we will. Well, folks, today we are talking about meeting agendas. And
what an exciting topic. Meeting agendas.
Yeah. It is. Okay. All right. Don't turn us off yet, yet. All right. I know this, basically would, put you, sounds like it would put you to sleep, but this is actually really important. And this has some really positive effects on your culture, on your team, on building morale, engagement, and getting all these cool things that you should be aiming for as a manager. So just listen in for a moment, please. And real quick, we want to mention something that's really cool that we're really excited about. We've developed a new app, and it's soon to be released. And Dad, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about this app?
Yeah, it's called Mind and Heart University, MHU. It is a web-based program, and it is accompanied by a mobile app, and it is designed to kind of bring Nash Consulting right to you. Managing is hard. So many of the mindsets and the skills and the behaviors that are required for a manager to really excel are not necessarily second nature. And, we go to work and we have so many things to do, and to keep some of the stuff on the radar is really hard. And so we've designed an app to make your growth and development as a manager just so much easier. So this is an app that you can access anytime, that you can use with your teams and your groups. It contains a bunch of really cool stuff. For example, it actually has Managing with Mind and Heart, which is our manager development program that we've been training people on for almost 30 years now. It's right there in the app. The videos are in there. It has discussion questions and prompts. You can basically meet with other managers and work through the videos and answer questions and apply these things and create a lot of sustainability for all these skills in your real life there at work. You can review and learn a bunch of new manager skills around how to run great meetings, how to build morale, how to create an environment where there's a lot of psychological safety. It's right there in the app. All of our podcasts are in there. We've got a lot of really cool articles and blogs. There's surveys that are really cool that you can distribute to your team to get feedback about how you're doing as a manager. There's another survey that will help you and your team kind of create an assessment about how healthy you are in terms of trust and your ability to be committed to decisions and that kind of thing. Just a lot of really cool features, and it's almost done. We've been working on this for a long time, and I'm going to say within the next several weeks, it's going to be out and ready to go. Ethan, what should someone do if they want to be first in line to get a hold of this app?
Yeah. Well, if you're someone that would like to get a management and leadership consultant right in your pocket, which is really the goal of this whole project, then really just go to our website. And if you go to our website, you'll see a ribbon at the very top of the page. Just click on that, and it will tell you a little bit more about the app and some of the cool features and stuff that we're working on. And then you'll see a mailing list to get signed up for. And so as soon as that app gets released, you'll get a notification about it, and boom, there you go. Management consultant in your pocket. So yeah, go check it out. By the way, our website is just nashconsulting.com, and we'll also link to the page for the mailing list sign up in the show notes. So check them out below. All right. Let's talk about
meetings. I can't wait to talk about
meeting agendas. By the way, folks, I also just want to mention that I mentioned this on the last episode, but we've created an effective and enjoyable meetings guidebook. And so it's kind of a companion resource for these last couple episodes. It's free of cost. If you'd like that guidebook, just email us at contact@nashconsulting.com. And by the way, this guidebook, as well as other guidebooks that we've created and will continue to create, are in the app. Another reason to sign up for that mailing list. So, meeting agendas, that's what we're talking about. All right, let's come back to a topic that we talked about last episode, but it's important that we touch on it again briefly. Why do meetings matter? Right? Why is it a big deal to be super intentional about designing how we meet together?
I think the simplest way that I would answer it this way, Ethan, I would say because it's really important that we're super intentional about our culture at work, right? Our work culture. Culture is everything, right? Culture is connected to morale. It's connected to quality and retention, and all the good things you can't pay for. And I'm not trying to say that the heart of a great culture is about meetings, but I am telling you this: it is really hard to build the kind of culture that you want without people being together having conversations, right? You can't build the kind of culture you want if people aren't collaborating, right? If people aren't building team and building trust, if people aren't making effective decisions together, if people aren't willing to look at roadblocks that we're facing as an organization or as a team, right? And work through those, right? These are things that happen in meetings if meetings are effective, if meetings are run well, if they're created intentionally and with a fair amount of wisdom, right? The heart really of an organization is its culture, and one of the prime building blocks of that culture are meetings. And so, we mentioned this last time, but I know meetings have a bad rap, right? And for good reason. People in many organizations spend way too much time in meetings, and to make it worse, they spend way too much time in, frankly, crappy meetings. And so they suck your soul. They discourage you. They waste your time. So of course people want to get away from this and not have meetings. Well, we would like to suggest that instead of not having meetings, transform your meetings. And in many cases, reduce the time. Yes, people spend in meetings. That's a whole nother topic. But when you do spend time in meetings, let's make sure that they're really, really valuable and really effective, and that there's value added, and that people walk out of the meetings and say to themselves, things are better because of that meeting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a plug for meetings. I think we really believe in them.
Yeah. To sum that all up,
please.
Meetings are where all the good things can happen. And I like to say that when meetings are intentionally designed and run really well, it's like spraying WD-40 into the gears. Just things start to really move smoothly because we've intentionally designed, intentionally engineered these meetings. And when we don't pay attention to them and we just let them unfold how they do and don't put time and attention to them, right? It's like pouring gears in the glue of your organization or team, right?
I think you meant
pouring glue in the gears.
Right. There you go.
It really slows everything down, creates a lot of friction, so on and so forth. And a big component, of course, of effective meetings is like, do we have an effective meeting agenda? Do we know how to use it? So on and so forth. So at their best, like meeting agendas at their best, when done well, what benefits might we be able to derive from an intentionally designed meeting agenda?
Oh, there's so many. I'll say first that, lots of times when there maybe should be an agenda, we don't have one because we're super, super busy. But the end result of that often is a meeting that's not run well. And that has a lot of downstream negative impacts. But an agenda, oh my gosh, number one, if I'm creating an agenda for my team meeting, I'm more likely to create a better meeting, right? I'm going to be intentional. That's one of the most important reasons to have an agenda is create a healthy, effective meeting. I'm thinking about the topics. I'm giving time frames to the topics. I know I'm not trying to do too much. I've figured out really who, we need to have some interactive time. I might not have thought of that if I hadn't been. So I guess the first reason that I really believe in agendas is it causes you to be proactively intentional about creating a good meeting and not just trying to do it on the fly, right? I would also say an agenda allows you as the leader, as the facilitator, to really effectively air traffic control the meeting during the meeting, right? It gives you kind of permission to say, hey, look, we only have a couple minutes left for this. Let's finish this up so we can move on. Having that right in front of you and in front of everybody gives you that sort of psychological permission to keep us moving and not feel like you're being a bully and just cutting people off. So it really does allow for the air traffic controlling. It allows the participants to help you air traffic control and to kind of collude and cooperate with you in that air traffic controlling because everybody sees the agenda. I'll throw in one more and see if you have some, Ethan. It also, if the agenda does get given out ahead of time, or even the fact that it's sitting right there in front of people, it allows people to process. We've talked about people that are processors and, need to kind of think through something a little bit. And so when you look at the agenda and it says, item 3, let's discuss we'll discuss the pros and cons of this decision. I know that in a few minutes, we're going to be discussing the pros and cons. And so consciously or not, I'm going to be doing some processing.
Yeah.
What else? What am I missing here, Ethan?
I think you nailed it. I mean, I think that last one that you added is the big one for me. I mean, all the reasons that you mentioned are important, but honestly, your meetings are going to be far more effective if people have a chance to process in advance. Yep. And yes, especially the people that their behavioral style is more process oriented. But guess what? Even the expedients would benefit from looking at the items we're going to talk about in advance and thinking about them. And there's actually a lot of research on this, right? They find that when people think about decisions prior to getting together as a group, the actual decisions tend to be far more effective because people don't get anchored to others' ideas in the group. They've actually thought about some of their ideas themselves. So this matters for decision making, and decision making is how you run an organization and a team, right? So this is extremely important.
That's really good. Let me throw one more in. There's a kind of anxiety that can happen when you go to a meeting and you don't know what's coming. And there's this thing you hope is going to be part of the meeting and you don't know if it's going to be part of the meeting. And so you're waiting for the thing. And if it doesn't happen when you think it should happen, you interrupt and you take people down a rabbit trail. So again, it's going to help me as a participant see the map, right there. It's going to take some of the anxiety away and help me to be more fully engaged in what's happening right now in the present.
Right. And of course, and you alluded to this, that, people are busy. Leaders and managers are busy. Everybody's busy. And so our instinct can be, we don't have time to create agenda. Let's just get together in a meeting. We'll figure it out. But look, one of my favorite sayings is pay now or pay later, right? Spend the time, the investment of time up front. And again, the downstream effects of 20 minutes of prep, if that, are huge, right? Inordinate. So spend that time, right? It's amazing what 20 minutes of preparation can do in a long run.
Well, because the benefit of a well-run meeting and the cost of a poorly run meeting are going to have big downstream implications. So you're absolutely right. Yeah. 15 minutes of preparation versus, okay, I think that's great. Yeah.
Now, okay, so do all meetings need agendas? Like every single meeting?
No. Okay. And in fact, this is something I've come to emphasize a little more lately in trainings. I don't want people to think that every single time people get together, they have to have a written agenda. There are lots of times where 4 people are getting together and their only topic is to discuss the next steps for this particular project. That's all they're doing. They don't need an agenda that says, item 1, discuss the next steps of this particular project. So, there's a lot of meetings where they're not necessary and we don't need to list those. I would say the kind of meeting that we're talking about would be, for example, my weekly or monthly team meeting with my department. And there's several topics we're going to be covering. That needs an agenda. There's so many moving parts there and so many things you want to do, which we'll talk about in a minute. You really need an agenda. So these are mostly for meetings where there's more than one topic. And you want there to be, and they're meetings that you really hope for some engagement and meaning participation. You know, if it's just an information meeting, I'm here to get on a Zoom call with 50 people and tell you something. We don't need an agenda for that.
Right. One heuristic that I use for this is just as simple as, if the meeting doesn't change topics at all, like from meeting to meeting, there's no change in topics, you probably don't need an agenda. Everybody knows exactly what's going to be discussed. If it's a meeting where the topics are different and change, have an agenda. Okay. A simple way to look at that. All right. So let's break down the core characteristics of a well-designed meeting agenda. And again, I mentioned that effective meeting guidebook that we have that you can email us about. This meeting agenda template that we're going to talk about here is in that guidebook. So that could be a good companion resource for you as you're listening to this episode. Mm-hmm. But what does a good agenda look like? What are some of the elements that would show up on this agenda?
There's no one size fits all, right? We want groups and organizations to kind of develop their own culture, their own vibe here. Just some general guidelines. I love the idea of let's use kind of as a generic meeting for this conversation. Let's say we're talking about my team meeting. This is me and 10 employees in my department, and we get together every other week, and we have this, I'm going to say 90-minute time every other week. I'm just kind of making that up. Generally, I like to start with a little bit of check-in. Icebreaker, we can talk about that another day, but maybe a little bit of time up front for checking in on how everybody's weekend was, or how everybody's doing, or maybe kind of a fun question, or maybe just 5 minutes of us hang out together and chill. That doesn't necessarily have to be written on the agenda, but it's an option, right? It's an option to have a kind of an icebreaker check-in time up front. What do you think about that, Ethan?
Well, I think you're right. And I actually think it's a bigger deal than most people think, right? Like if you have a monthly meeting together, or like you said, if it's even a weekly meeting together, take some time to build culture, to build relationships. Again, even if it's 5, 10, 15 minutes of some discussion, sharing with each other, some turn and talks about whatever type of topic. If you don't think that the relationship matters to an effective team, like the personal relationship, I'm sorry, that's not true. And so if we're going to make the time to get together, dedicating just a little bit of time for that is really important. So I think you're right? Spend maybe some time, check-ins, icebreakers, right? What else? What would be another thing on this agenda?
Again, the order can be debatable, but I think it's important up front to have the leader. If it's my meeting, I get a chunk of time to just share some things. It's really important that I share information, keep people up to date. So I might have a chunk of the meeting, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on what I have, to just share things. And, I'm building enough time for people to ask questions, etc. So that might be the next section, right? It might be my leaders report out. Again, these items can be sort of templated in, if that's a word, templated, right? You can create sort of a generic template agenda that you already have at your disposal, and you can plug in the pieces for each of your meetings. I would have as probably my second part, the leaders report. Often I would then have a section that's specifically dedicated to like following up and reviewing. What are things from the last meeting that we need to kind of pick up again or review or discuss? So that might be the third thing, is follow up, review, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And the follow up and review, I mean, those could often be the ABCDs from your last meeting, for example. Right. Again, we talked about that last episode, the ABCDs. We'll touch on it again here in a moment, but all right, like let's look at action items, maybe even just kind of an update on where we're at with some of those that our people on track with hitting those action items on the buy-win date?
Yep.
How did the communication go? What questions came up that we might need to address here? Yeah, spending some time on that.
Yep.
Now, the another element of the agenda is going to be just what we label like other agenda items. Now, talk about the type of things that would be productive under this label of other agenda items.
Yeah, this is the heart of your agenda. These are the items you want to get to. And I want lots of things to say about this here briefly, but first of all, try to create as much interaction as possible. This would be a great place to, for example, do a style 3 decision. And we've done episodes on decision making and the 6 different ways of deciding. Style 3 decision. I'm going to ask people to maybe get into small groups and talk about this topic and what they think, come back and then share with me their thoughts about this decision I need to make, right? I'm asking for their input. That's a style 3 decision. Well, that's a great thing to have as an agenda item. Style 3 decision. What are we going to do about X, Y, and Z, right? It might be a time to brainstorm on something together. It might be a time to do some problem solving. It might be a time for someone else in the meeting to present something, right? To ask for some help or some assistance in something that's going on in their world, or to present a new learning or something to us. It might be time for a guest from another department to come in and update us on something. So the idea is you want to create some variety. You want to keep things interactive as much as possible. You want to keep things engaging. But these are the things that we want to cover in this meeting. And I guess I just want to, a couple of things about that. I want to remind our listeners, don't plan too much. One of the most important features of the agenda is over on the right-hand side. You are basically time stamping every single thing. This item is going to last from 10 o'clock till 10:25, right? Whatever it is. But you get better at this as you go. I'm still working on it, but man, my habit is to give 10 minutes to a discussion, and it always takes 30 minutes. And I've learned to give way more time, right? And you get better and better at that. But you just do your best to be super realistic about the time over on the right-hand column so that you don't try to pack in too many things. Because I've seen too many agendas that are just literally a bullet list of all the things we want to cover, and we never get through it. And so this other agenda item piece, you want to be real careful to only cover, we only have time for 3 things or whatever, right? So that's the next item. It's just other agenda items.
And something I want to point out about a lot of those other agenda items that you spoke to, right? Brainstorm on solutions, discuss pros and cons of XYZ purchase, right? Decide on whatever decision, right? Get input on this decision. What a lot of those things have in common is they're kind of action words, right? Meetings, when done well, are not just about communicating information. That's an important part, but it's about if we're going to spend time gathering together, let's actually do things together.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just something to keep in mind. If we're moving on from this other agenda item thing, I like to have what might just be kind of a anything else type of agenda item, which,
right.
This is where you're setting aside maybe just 10 minutes, and it's, some quick FYIs, maybe talking about some topics for future meetings. But again, this is like maybe 10 minutes. Now, you got to be careful. When it's quick FYIs, that doesn't mean somebody gets to come in and just kind of take over this whole section, right? Hey, I got this thing I need to talk about, right? That's why we have a parking lot that we'll talk about in a moment here. But these are literally just, hey, quick updates. Hey, remember, I'm going to be out on vacation for the next couple weeks, so can you just get me the paperwork by Friday so I have time to take care of it before I head out, right? Those type of things. And so, again, quick FYIs.
And if somebody does take that moment to say, oh yeah, FYI, I want to talk about this big thing I need your help on, or this, et cetera. It's a really good time to kind of train your group. Say, hey, you know what? That's something that, we can put in the parking lot. Let's not do that right now. And what you're training people to do, and it's a process, is to really use that agenda. Like make it your map and do your best not to deviate from it. There'll be deviations, right? But do your best to make the default mode that we're going to stick with the agenda.
That's right. So we've covered a bunch of stuff during this meeting, but not too much. And we're putting timestamps for each one so we can make sure we stay on track with those items. We can remind each other, hey, we have just a couple minutes left on this discussion. Let's wrap this up here. Now we're starting to get to the end of the meeting. And now we get to our A, B, C, and D, which again, we talked about last episode. So A, B, C, D, just real briefly, is action items, right? What action items are coming from this meeting? By when and by whom? Who's going to take care of these action items and when do they need to be done?
Mm-hmm.
Communication items, what needs to be communicated coming out of this meeting, and make sure to manage that message, which again, we went into more depth last episode. And then D is the decisions, right? What decisions that we made, did we make? And of course, it doesn't have to go in that order. In fact, it probably makes most sense to start with the D, what decisions did we make, and then go to action items, by when and by whom, and communication items. So again, we're taking 10 minutes, 5 minutes at the end of every meeting to ensure that we're walking away with clarity, right? To make sure that we didn't just kind of make a decision, but it wasn't clear to everybody. We're clarifying the decisions that were made. Or if we almost made a decision but didn't, this is our opportunity to say, hey, I don't think we fully made that decision. Let's make that right now. Right. And so this is about creating clarity. ABCDs.
Yep. Then at the very end of the agenda, right, we're going to have a parking lot, as you mentioned earlier, Ethan, and it's just it just should be written right there on the agenda. It's the parking lot, and there's a couple ways to use that. It's a really great place to throw stuff that does come up during the meeting that you don't have time for, that somebody brings up, and you say, hey, that's a great thing. Let's talk about that. Let's put that in the parking lot, and we'll talk about that at the next meeting. I've seen the parking lot used proactively, where there's actually some things in the parking lot already at the very beginning of the meeting. And the implication is we magically may have time today. Let's not count on it, but we may have time to get to that. If not, we'll get to it at some other time. I just want you to know that it is something that I have on my radar, right? It's gonna come up, but it's just a really good catch-all, good place to kind of put stuff that comes up during the meeting.
Yeah, I love it. The magic of a parking lot, right?
Yep.
Where we get to say, hey, it's not that this is important. It's just not what's most important right now. So let's put this aside for later, right? And it actually lets people feel heard without it derailing that entire meeting. If we're able to put things in the parking lot.
Right.
The last thing I'll just add to this is that, occasionally, like maybe quarterly or a few times a year, you'll have an agenda item that's about debriefing the meeting or your meetings in general, right? This is your opportunity to ask for feedback. Hey, how are these meetings going?
Yep.
What would you like to see more of or less of? What should we keep doing, stop doing? How can we improve these meetings? I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that you could ask for feedback on. And also, how are the agendas effective, right? Are we getting what we need on these agendas to be prepared for these meetings? I just think it's a really good idea, just like you should be asking for feedback on your management occasionally to your employees. Let's ask for feedback on how these meetings are going so we continue to iterate and continue to improve. It's an ongoing process, a living, breathing organism here. So again, that might be a quarterly feedback debrief agenda item.
Yeah, we want to have great meetings. I want your help. Let's make these meetings awesome. What's working, what's not. I love that.
Right. Yeah. And so the last thing I want to ask you here is just, figuring out what should show up on the agenda can be tricky for anybody, right? For people that are facilitating or running these meetings. Like maybe as the leader, again, you have your leader report, you have things that that we need to talk about. But when you work on a team, that means you don't see everything or you are all knowing of the most important things to talk about. And so talk to us a little bit about this idea of the floating agenda and how this works.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I don't, as the leader, I don't want to be the sole arbitrator of what shows up in our meetings. I want people to have input. And so there's a lot of different ways to get that input. The floating agenda is this idea that there is some way for people to get their topics onto the agenda. And there's a couple ways to do that. But the idea is you would let people know that, hey, I really want your input. on topics and discussion items. So here's how I'd like you to get that to me. And you need to figure that out. It might be a shared page on your intranet site. It might be sending you an email, whatever it takes. How do they get their items, suggested items, onto the agenda? Now, here's something key about that. Just because somebody suggested or requested a certain item doesn't mean it automatically makes the agenda, right?
Unless it's mine.
Unless it's yours. Everything Ethan wants on the agenda makes it, right? But as the leader, as a facilitator of this meeting, I actually need to create an effective meetings, right? So I can't necessarily put everything on there just because of time and the how these topics relate to one another. So the idea is, if you suggest something onto the floating agenda, one of three things will happen to it, and I can promise you this: it will either make the agenda, and you'll see it right there on the agenda, or it'll make the agenda in the parking lot, as we discussed earlier, which means we may get to it, we may not, but if we don't, I promise we will get to it at a later date. That's what that means. Or you decide it's really not an agenda that's, an item that's appropriate for the agenda. It's just something that we should be talking about separately. It's not really a group thing. And if that's what you decide, you really, really have to circle back to that person. And you have to say to them, hey, thanks for that. Let's cover this in our one-on-one, as opposed to putting that on the agenda, right? So, but either way, whichever one of those three options you choose, the person who made the suggestion gets the closure on that item.
That's right. Good.
I have a question for you, Ethan. What do you do if real life hits and you just don't have time to build an agenda and get it out to people a couple days before the meeting, which is ideal, right? Ideally, I create an agenda, I sent it out a day, 2 days ahead, so people have a chance to process. But what if I just missed that? I didn't get to it.
Yeah. Cancel the meeting. No, I'm just kidding. That, again, probably not realistic, or in fact, that would be really upsetting to people that had this on their calendar. So, right. No, I think there's a couple things you can do. So, for example, hey, I just didn't get it out ahead of time. Maybe I have a few minutes, 10, 20 minutes before the meeting or sometime earlier that day, put it together real quick. Even if it's not perfect or super explicit on every item, having something and then being able to hand it out at the meeting or send it out right at the meeting. Or, if it's a virtual meeting, maybe you just create it and then you share your screen so everybody can still see the agenda. And then, another thing to do is like, hey, if you really didn't have time at all, take the first 5-10 minutes of that meeting and just make the agenda there in real time. All right. Hey, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's what I want to do. What was on the floating agenda? Okay. And just kind of figuring it out real quick. So basically, having something for people to look at is better than nothing at all, even if it's not perfect. And I think the key thing is, regardless, you want to try to put some time limit to each of those items, right, even a real time, right? So we don't spend 50 minutes of a 60-minute meeting on the first thing. Right. And so, don't let perfection get in the way of getting something done. Right. I think that's how it goes, or something.
There's a phrase that's very similar to that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Well, anything else you want to say on meeting agendas?
No, I just want to emphasize again that, and we said this twice already, it's a discipline, and I don't have time. I have too many things to do. Let's just wing it. I just really want to emphasize what you said earlier, Ethan, that it's that proactive, taking the 10 minutes or whatever it takes, is going to have such an important payoff, because the better your meetings are, the better the culture is, the better the productivity is, the better the relationships are. There's so many things that come from healthy meetings.
Amen. All right, folks, thanks for listening. Hey, by the way, if you enjoy this podcast, if you benefit from this podcast, look, the best thing you can do to support us is simply just subscribe to this podcast. So open up Spotify or Apple Podcasts, iTunes right now. Just hit that subscribe button. It will go a long, long ways. And thank you very much. And tune in next time. Bye now.
Wow.